My wife and I were high school sweethearts who married right after graduation and before my military enlistment. We've now been married over 24 years. Recent revelations have turned my world upside down. Before I start, I want to explain that my wife suffered serious sexual abuse for 2 years as a child and suffers from severe borderline personality disorder, which was only recently diagnosed. Had we known about her mental health issues, we could have avoided what happened because we would have known what red flags to look for. This does not excuse her actions. She is still responsible for her decisions. 4 years after we got married, she had an affair with my best friend from the military. It was hard to accept and took me years to get over it, but I forgave them both. He disappeared for a few years while her and I spent a lot of time talking things out. When he came back, he was married and we had a lot of talks and things returned to normal. He was like my brother and I loved them both. A few years later, my wife confessed that she had bisexuality tendencies, but never explored them. It was an interesting conversation, but she never indicated it was anything more than a conversation. A year or so later, she went to a party with some coworkers and after some drinks, started messing around with her female coworker. She said it was awkward and uncomfortable and they didn't get very far. She confessed to me that same week, and while I was not happy, I dismissed it because I wasn't threatened by it. Not long after this, she started hanging out with an old friend from high school, and that I wasn't comfortable with. Our kids would hang out and watch movies at his place, and I went over there a few times when I wasn't working. Then she started hanging out there later, and one day, she came home at 6:30 a.m. and I was furious. She said I was overreacting and that they didn't do anything. She said they were just cuddling on the couch and watching a movie. I lost it, and a few days later after I had time to calm down, I told her I didn't want her to see him again. She never went back but gave me a hard time about telling her who she could be friends with. 3 years later, we were having a conversation about her failed lesbian experiment when she confessed that she had sex with my best friend's wife a few months earlier. I was upset and asked if my friend knew about it, and she said no. While drinking, again, she said they were messing around and had sex. Again, I wasn't threatened by her messing around with another woman, and she said she was no longer having bisexuality tendencies. I was angry about doing it behind my back, not talking to me about her feelings, and then waiting so long to tell me. This was 2009. From 2009 and 2014, we faced a ton of hardships. 2012 was our worst year. My biggest problem came from a mostly sexless marriage, since our second daughter was born. By sexless, I'm referring to 1 to 3 times a month, if anything at all. I was romantic to her, giving her roses, buying her chocolate, making her dinner, taking her out and watching TV together on the couch. We didn't have a lot of money, so we made do. She just never appeared interested. I re-injured my back due to a military-related injury that made it hard for me to be as active as I'd like. I could lash out on days where my pain was the worst and could make miserable to be around. I was never violent, but I did my best to make up for it on the good days. I'm still waiting even today, 14 years later, to get the corrective surgery I need from the VA. On top of that, I was working full-time, was a full-time student, and trying to get my business off the ground. I had a full plate on top of my back injury, but I made it a point of making time for her. She was suffering depression from the birth of our last daughter. She would shut me out when I tried to talk to her. It started a lot of arguments and fights. She worked part-time and was mostly responsible for caring for the house. Unfortunately, the house was always filthy, and any conversation about it always resulted in an argument and her telling me that I needed to help more. So she started hanging out with some of the other soccer moms to vent her frustration, and I let it go because I didn't want her to stay stressed out. I was already working over 60 hours per week, attending school for 30 hours a week, and in daily pain. I didn't want her to feel like me and wanted her to just try and enjoy herself and have a good time. From 2014 to 2021, everything was fine. I graduated with my degree, my business was picking up. I was working less hours. We moved out of the city and into a rural community over an hour north. It was still a sexless marriage, but we were enjoying each other's company a lot better. My back still hurts, and we occasionally have an argument, but nothing too serious. I was proud of our relationship. We were strong and all was good. We even just bought a house this year. This was up until September 7th. I had always suspected she slept with her friend, and she had always denied it and even gave me a hard time about accusing her. It was just a feeling. I never had proof, but I believed it was true. My wife went on a weekend trip with my daughters, and I had to stay home to work. While they were gone, I had a serious nightmare about my suspicions and woke up in a sweat. The incident had occurred almost 15 years ago, but I still think of it occasionally, like a feeling of leaving your oven on after leaving your house. It just eats away at you. When she came home, I asked her about it. I was surprised when she finally admitted it, but was more surprised when she admitted to several more affairs, including a man she fell in love with in 2012. I was devastated, crushed. She told me that she never messed around with her friend until after I accused her of sleeping with him. She said that she went to his place and they were drinking and he made a move and she didn't stop him. She said she hated it and it made her feel disgusted. But the next weekend, she went out with him and some of her friends, and he started getting possessive of her. Her friend saw it and she was embarrassed. On the way home, she told him she didn't belong to him and that she loved me. She planned to stop hanging out with him. When she got home, this was when I said she couldn't see him anymore, and even though she made that decision on her own, she gave me an attitude about it. The next affair she had was from January to February 2012. She had sex with my daughter's soccer coach, who I knew from the games. He became friends with the soccer moms and they would often hang out. One night, he calls her at work and the conversation turns to sex, and they start going into the dirty details of their sexual fantasies. He invites her over after work, and even though she knew why he wanted her to come over, she went anyway. They started drinking and had sex. They got together 2 other times after that. In April of 2012, she met a guy at work who started talking to her. They started dating for a few months and were having sex in his car because he currently lived with his parents. They would have sex in random parking lots. I never met this guy, but he met my kids. She fell in love with him, and when she found out he was moving to Texas to be with his kids, they discussed her going with him. She realized I would fight her for custody and decided she couldn't go with him. She said after he left, she never had another affair because it was heartbreaking. This was all confessed on D-Day. It was a lot to take in, but she promised there was nothing else. The next day, we continued talking and some thoughts started popping in my head. I was talking to my best friend about what my wife was telling me, and he was consoling me. And then I realized that my wife slept with his wife, and I didn't know what he knew. I was concerned about ruining his marriage, so I asked my wife about it. I asked if my friend knew about them, and she didn't say anything. Warning bells went off in my head, so I asked if he was there. She didn't say anything. My blood started boiling and I asked if it was a threesome, and she said yes. She confessed that he called her and said his wife wanted to have a threesome, but she only trusted my wife. Supposedly, my wife asked his wife if it was true, and she said yes. They planned it out and met a few weekends later. The threesome started with my wife and my friend rubbing on his wife, but the only two people to have intercourse was my wife and my friend. She never had sex with his wife, who the threesome was supposed to be for. I exploded. We've been seeing a therapist for a few months. I'm hurting. I feel stupid, ashamed, enraged, disrespected. And I feel pathetic for even considering trying to work it out. She's been faithful for the last 9 years, so she says. But it doesn't change the facts of what happened. And yet I'm stuck between craving her touch and being disgusted by it. If it wasn't for the fact that her BPD was a large contributor to her decision making, I would have dropped her. But as I learned more about her disorder, I realized the feeling she was having in a relationship was strongly impacted by mental illness. She would see only the negatives in our relationships, but never remember the positives. It was either all good or all bad. She would be all clingy and loving or hateful and nasty. There was no middle ground there. There is a lot more to the story about D-Day and her confessions, the turmoil and deceptions, but I'll save that for another post. For now, I just need some honest feedback. Thanks.